the big US private equity firms, pension funds, Canadian investors were starting to set up offices in London to take advantage of the European recovery story. And I thought, fantastic. You need that in a business, especially in a large firm. You need the sponsor internally to really push you forward. And you need, mentors, whether inside or outside the business that you're in, to help you kind of navigate the difficult, challenges wherever they may be.
Welcome to the People Property Place podcast. I'm delighted to welcome Rebekah Tobias, Managing Director at family office and private investment group MARCOL, to the podcast today. Rebekah at MARCOL is responsible for introducing new business growth initiatives, platform strategies, and investor relationships, JV and co-invest partners across a range of sectors in real estate, private equity, and venture capital. She's also the founder of Independence Ventures, a consulting firm providing strategic advice on operational real estate platforms. Previously, she's held senior roles at M7 Real Estate, Cushman Wakefield and CBRE in capital markets, investor relations, and capital raising. And it gives me great pleasure that she's joining me on the podcast today. So Rebekah, welcome to the pod.
Thanks, Matt. I appreciate it. I'm very delighted to be here.
Not at all. Well, look, we'll get on to your role at MARCOL and Independence Ventures a little bit later, but starting a little bit earlier in your career, can you tell me, A, where you're from, but also how you got into real estate and why real estate?
That's a very good question. So I'm from Pennsylvania originally, in a very rural part of Pennsylvania. My parents, mother in particular, grew up on a dairy farm. So, that's a sort of humble beginnings, I suppose. I couldn't wait to kind of get out of the state when I was growing up, and decided to go to university in California, as far away as I could possibly go without leaving the United States. So I only applied to one university in San Diego after having visited, and decided to actually take a gap year, which is a very rare thing, I'll say, in the US. When you grow up, it's kind of the trajectory is you graduate high school, you go straight to college, you're applying a year or so before. And my parents thought, okay, this is strange. But actually, I had a method to the madness, which is in California state schools, if you live there for a year and get residency, your in-state residency tuition is much lower. In fact, it's largely subsidized by California State.
Nice.
I think still is the case, but back then it certainly was. And my parents were, very blue collar, working class. And so they didn't have, we didn't have a huge amount of resources to send 3 kids to university. So I thought, well, I'll do them a bit of a favor, and massive cost savings by moving out there, getting a job. And actually my first job while I was getting my residency was in real estate. And I worked as a receptionist for a property management company doing coastal rentals. It was at the time owned by a family member who lived out there. So of course, it was great to have a foot in the door. But I quickly sort of outgrew that role and wanted to take on more. And so decided to look elsewhere, got a job with a commercial real estate appraiser who had his own small business. And I came on board as an office manager. He allowed me to have a flexible schedule. So when I started university a year later, I was able to actually balance somehow a 40-day work week and my studies. I never lived on campus, so I didn't have the whole sorority, fraternity kind of party scene, although I lived on the beach in San Diego, so we were doing our fair share of partying. And I looking back, have no idea how I managed to keep my grades and have the active social life that I had. But I spent in total about 6 years in San Diego. Even after I finished my degree, I was still working for the same real estate appraiser. And, he was an exceptional entrepreneur. He taught me a lot about kind of running your own kind of small niche business, and also, of course, the trade of real estate appraisal, which I then took back to the East Coast when I graduated and moved to New York. I was able to apply at several different big firms, CBRE, Cushman Wakefield, a few others, and decided on, well, CBRE was always kind of one of the largest, of course, at the time. And I thought this is a fantastic sort of segue, even though I did an English degree, which again, I had no idea what I wanted to do with that. But during my last year of university, I was accepted to do a special study abroad in English at Cambridge University and studied at Gonville and Keys. So again, that was a great experience, brought me to the UK, fell in love with it. And, I didn't realize kind of 10 years after that I'd be living there. But through the CBRE experience, I had said to them from the start, I'd love to be properly trained in appraisal with the goal to move into investment and with a goal to move abroad. And they thought that was quite ambitious, right off the bat. And this was in 2004, 2005. So we were nearing the top of the market, and you should have, the environment was just so crazy in capital markets. The biggest deals were transacting. There was so much money being made by the investment banks. It was a really interesting time to be in New York in the rat race. Of course, 3 years of that could kill anyone, just given how fast paced it was. But that was the kind of foundation that kicked everything off, really, was having that.
And you talk about real estate appraisal. Is that valuation, or is that underwriting and appraisals from an investment perspective?
So in the US, we call it appraisal, but it's valuation.
But it's valuation work over here in the UK. So you're
Yes.
doing valuation reports or loan security reports on behalf of banks or homeowners, or was it just any type of appraisal or valuation work that came into this small business?
Well, this in San Diego, this was all commercial as well. So big commercial office buildings, industrial, medical office, whatever it was. Same in New York. It was all commercial, big office blocks. I did a lot of regional office in New Jersey as well, and some New York residential. So it was a mix of things, mostly for loan security purposes. So our clients were a mixture of the actual owners or the lenders. Yeah. So the big banks as well as the owner operators.
So that was your kind of like route into this world of property and real estate, and you kind of attacked it from a valuation or an appraisal perspective. When you got into CBRE, did your kind of eyes open in terms of the different routes and different trajectories and areas of real estate that you could pursue your career, or did you kind of have an understanding before that?
Yes, I knew once you're in the bigger firms, there's opportunities, and they do advertise it as well for you to move around, get a range of experience. And especially in the UK, you have the graduate scheme where you move between 3 or 4 different roles and different teams and different departments. And I think that's such a great experience for a younger person to have. And then they can figure out, okay, I really love this particular area of real estate or that. So I highly encourage that. Because I was already in valuation, and that was my background, and I was, not MRICS at the time, but I did have New York State qualification. I thought I'll sort of leverage that experience, and it is a fantastic foundation because you can understand, obviously, the technical aspects that go into the underlying value of an asset, which prepares you for almost anything that you go into in real estate. I definitely wanted to do more of course, everyone wants to be doing the big deals as a broker. And, there was all of this kind of prestigious nature of being a broker in a way back then. Yeah. And with the large deals that were happening, that was kind of where I saw myself. Although, the team was like, whoa, let's in time, get your feet under the desk. And I had to stay. It was 2 or 3 years before I could move abroad. So when I kept putting my hand up to move abroad, my manager at the time kept saying, not the right time. And actually, we didn't want to lose you either. And I said, well, I'm probably going to end up going, whether it's with you or not. Unfortunately, I'd love it to still be with the company. So eventually, in December 2007, he finally conceded and said, and I had some interviews with, of course, the London team. And they agreed to send me in 2008, beginning of 2008. So I landed in London in January 2008, so 9 months prior to the Lehman crash.
Can I just interject for a moment? At school and high school or university, or what kind of kid were you, or what were you at that stage? Were you really academic? How would you reflect on that?
I wasn't terribly academic. I did okay in school. I never applied myself very much to studies. I always kind of just got by barely, but I was never, I mean, I'm sure if I spent a lot more time on homework and studying, I would have done better, but I did okay. And so actually, I've been working since I was 14. I begged my parents for a job at a local fire hall to bus tables to make a bit of money. I've always been driven in terms of having some financial freedom, which gave me independence. And we'll get on probably to that more later. But my parents were, you know, as I said, very working class, hardworking. My mother was a teacher for 35 years. My dad worked at a printing, you know, press back in the day. And they were never terribly ambitious, but I just knew I wanted to have my own money to be able to do the things that I wanted to do. So I think I did an actual article about my first job proper job at Dairy Queen, running the drive-through window, which was a very funny story. And then I went on to waitressing, and this was all in high school. I was still, you know, having to show up for school and playing, you know, girls soccer and other sports and having a job. Again, I don't really know how I managed to do that, which is why my studies were never a major focus. It was more just getting into the workforce somehow and earning money so that I didn't have to rely on my parents. My father and I clashed quite a bit in high school. So the thought of asking him for money to kind of go to the mall or meet my friends and, you know, go to a movie,
that wasn't in the picture.
No.
So you've always had that like drive and independence and like vision and trying to make stuff happen. And I guess that plays out in terms of wanting to come back to the UK. So you landed in the UK with CBRE in 2008.
Yes.
What's the state of the market at that stage when you got off the plane?
Still considered peak of the market. There were signs of cracks in the housing market, but certainly not to the extent that we saw obviously play out in Q3, Q4. But very interestingly, the manager in New York who was sending me said, look, he sat me down and said, look, we're in for a major, major market crash. And you should just be aware of that. You're actually a bit safer, to be honest, moving to the London market versus New York, partly because of the compensation structure. So, you know, I moved from a very commission model where you know, eat what you kill kind of thing to a more stable salary plus bonus, which is better in obviously through downturns. It's a bit more safe and secure. So actually, in a weird way, he did me a massive favor. And we're still in touch to this day. He's an absolutely great guy.
So you moved over here, and what team did you land in at CBRE?
So I was in the Central London valuation team, actually based in the city, and then I moved to the West End.
And so within a couple of months having kind of landed, the market had turned, and I guess you were incredibly busy. You know,
incredibly busy.
Clients wanting to get weekly, monthly updates in terms of their portfolios.
Well, we ended up doing all the loan value revaluations for the loan books for the biggest UK and Irish banks, all, you know, massively underwater. So we were extremely busy from 2008 till about early 2010 through that exercise. So it also was a crash course into getting to know the UK market, getting to understand, because the valuation techniques are very different. We were purely sort of discounted cash flow focused in the US, and in the UK it was more, you know,
red book valuations.
Yes,
and,
we never had a red book. I had no idea what they were talking about. But yeah, it was definitely more this kind of equivalent yield, you know, different terms that I had never heard of before. So it was getting to know that, which again was a fantastic way to get stuck straight into the market, despite what was going on around, which was obviously not good news for anyone.
Did you stay in valuation for long at CBRE, or did you kind of pivot or change teams?
So I would say actually one of my skills is networking generally. I was very good at networking internally, getting to know the right people, the lay of the land, how things work. I was never into politics myself, but I understood the politics. So I was able to kind of move around quite a bit, which was great. And was getting in front of the right people on the capital market side, on the investment teams, creating those relationships for when the time was right. And in 2010, the market did come back. And a lot of my clients, previous clients in the US, the big US private equity firms, pension funds, Canadian investors were starting to set up offices in London to take advantage of the European recovery story. And I thought, fantastic. I know all these, they're my former clients. I have relationships already, and I can try and carve out this sort of cross-border capital markets role, which didn't previously exist. And it wasn't really until 2010 and onwards that London became, the international pool of capital that it's become, or attracting as much international capital as it's ever done before. And that was a huge wave for the US investors to come in and again, look at different opportunities. So I was in a great place.
Because of your relationships in New
timing-wise.
York with your previous clients and colleagues, and they were having conversations with capital who wanted to access this market, you were on the ground here and you were working in more of an investment seat at the time, or had put yourself in a position to be able to be in an investment seat and almost
Right.
acting as a conduit between North American capital looking to enter into the UK and European market.
Right, exactly. And most firms were starting to set up these teams to cover the globe. So we had the guy covering Middle East, Asia, PAC, and then of course, US, North America. So I was in a really good position once moving over to the investment side to say, look, I love to focus on this particular area, these particular clients coming in. And we were doing, some of the very early deals for Blackstone when they came over. One of the first sales I was put on in 2012, big, deals in London, was the Adelphi building off the Strand, which Blackstone bought actually via the sort of debt route at the time, which we were kind of dealing with in the background, even though we were contracted by the seller. But it was such an interesting time to be working with, those kind of clients, getting their foothold into London. And then, of course, look where they are now, the biggest real estate owners and operators globally. So it was a great experience. And I love CBRE.
And your role was kind of relationships with capital and understanding what their requirements were, but also market facing in terms of going out and originating and finding deals. Is that right?
Yeah.
And which particular areas or segments of the market did you focus on at that stage?
It was mainly London offices was the main focus. And I had a fantastic mentor at CBRE, Richard Womack, who I then later followed to Cushman Wakefield, as these things go. And he was, he was on a lot of the big deals, which again was great experience and kind of took me under his wing. And you need that in a business, especially in a large firm. You need the sponsor internally to really push you forward. And you need, mentors, whether inside or outside the business that you're in, to help you kind of navigate the difficult challenges wherever they may be. So I had a great mixture of support around me from, men and women, importantly. So that was a huge advantage.
And did you absolutely love the investment space? Was it exactly what you thought it would be, just in terms of the speed, the volume, the people that you got to meet, the types of deals that you were doing? Because I guess you'd worked as a valuer or an appraiser for a little while, looking over the fence at these people who are in capital markets. Yes. Was it as expected?
It was far more, exciting. I can definitely bang out a valuation report still, but it's just a different environment. It's a different level of energy. You're in the market, you're out sort of in a way creating the market by doing the deals that the valuers then rely on as comparable evidence. So although my manager did say at the time, you kind of need to switch the mindset because investors are more kind of forward looking. Not that valuation's totally retrospective, but you are relying on sort of historical transactions at that point, and you need to start looking forward at the vision, telling the story. That's how you're going to sell property. And I thought, yeah, that's exactly right. So I've had to make that mindset shift. And at the time, we had such a great team dynamic. We had a real mix of diversity, strangely enough, in the team, where previously, and still today, unfortunately, it's very male-dominated in investment. And it doesn't quite suit the lifestyle of working moms, if I'm honest. It's very competitive. So I do like the competitive nature of it. However, I'm very much a team player. And so you do get that kind of pressure and stress of, if I'm not around, someone's taking my clients, someone's taking my deals. And you're never going to get away from that, especially as a woman going off for any period of time, or even if you don't have children, but other things kind of do come into play as you get older. As a woman, it's not the most conducive environment and most supportive environment to deal with those things. So that's why we still don't see many women in investment today. And even in, investment banking, private equity, any kind of competitive environment where you are up against, men of the same, at the same level.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, you're at a disadvantage.
Yeah, it's definitely improving, right? I had Alexa Baden-Powell on the podcast recently, and she set up WIN, the Women's Investment Network, and she's definitely clocked or noted that there's definitely more interest or flexibility built in to enable ladies to thrive in more of a transactional environment. But I do take what you're saying in terms of the challenges presented or that need to be navigated in order to rise to the top of the food chain there. Talk to me about the move away from CBRE. Why did you make the move away from CBRE?
I, at the time, wanted more experience on the sort of actual investor side. So I joined a developer, still a close friend of mine, who was trying to sort of reinvent the business, had sold most of the legacy portfolio at that stage and was kind of starting again. And I love the challenge of that. I do attract a challenge as I've seen in my entire career. And it was a very interesting, it was a stint in a way. I didn't stay very long. It was a very interesting experience in that we had an extremely competitive market in London and elsewhere at the time, again, with a lot of international capital coming in. And so we were just being outbid constantly, and we didn't have the right capital sources at the time to back us up. We were globetrotting, as everyone was, looking for those capital sources. And so I think it was just, it felt really, pushing water up a hill the whole time. And their focus, they were an Irish business, so the focus went back to Ireland for a bit. And at the time, my previous sponsor within CBRE was moving to Cushman Wakefield, and they were creating a whole new cross-border capital markets team. So again, it was that ability to go back into advisory and, kind of help them build up this new team.
And leverage the relationships, skills, track record. Still North American capital, right? Looking to enter into the UK market. Had it broadened in terms of your remit, in terms of the investable universe, like outside of just London offices, or was it still that as a focus?
Yeah, I was actually doing more than in the other gateway cities in Europe. So it was taking me into the Netherlands, Germany, France, a bit to be able to cater for those clients wherever they wanted to go. I'd help them with local expertise through our teams on the ground and leverage the network of the business. So that was a quite interesting time. Unfortunately, unfortunately, the business was bought out, merged with DTZ. Very difficult to manage a large transaction, M&A transaction like that, and maintain the culture of the business. So I think there's quite a bit, of, it was probably not structured as well as it potentially could have been.
Yeah.
I also was pregnant had my first son, who's now 8, and came back, was worse, and then had our second son. So if you ask someone at Cushman, they probably say they didn't see me very much. But I have to say, there's times also, I was in my mid-30s, and there's no right time to start a family for anyone. And you just have to get on with it. You just have to forget about kind of what else is going on and just crack on, because unfortunately we have a limited time period to make that happen, if it does happen.
Yeah.
Or if you want it to happen. So yeah, I kind of was.
Did you struggle to find your identity as a new mum or a returning mum to work in a high pressurized intense deal-orientated environment and juggle home life as well.
Yeah, I had very good support at home and a very hands-on husband who still does a lot of the work today. So I'm very lucky. It wasn't really leaving the kids at home that was an issue. It was just, what am I going back to? And am I being valued? Is there a purpose? You'll hear that a lot, I think, from women going back into the workforce. So I'm leaving my kids at home, but like, what am I actually doing? I am earning money for the family, which is great, but there has to be something that I'm working towards and a bigger purpose to get me really excited about something. So I just didn't find that anymore, really. And I didn't see that in an agency capacity. So I had been looking when I was off on maternity leave, which it was hilarious that people say, "Oh, how was your holiday when you come back from mat leave?" It is the exact opposite. It is definitely not a holiday, but I tried to enjoy that time, but the stress and the kind of pressure of trying to figure it out probably did sort of ruin that time, which you never get back, but I did find a new role with M7 Real Estate while I was still off of maternity. And again, I pivoted, and it was a very stressful time. There's no woman that comes back into the workforce after having a child for any length of time, being out and feels so confident, coming back. And then I had also compounded that with moving into a completely different role in capital raising and investor relations for a new strategy M7 were setting up at the time, which was called Tunstall, and that was an alternatives platform. So we were working on more typical private equity real estate transactions, acquiring operating businesses which are asset backed, which was again an inroad to what I ultimately, have ended up doing, which was great. And also we raised a small debt fund that was eventually absorbed into M7, and I got involved in raising or helping to coordinate, the IR team across the equity funds and the debt fund. And that was an advantage point I hadn't appreciated, being in the fund management structure and everything that went along with the actual capital raising process, which was very interesting to see. I think I felt very not as excited in terms of being so far removed from the transactional side, not being able to be involved in the deals, although I was able to speak very knowledgeably about the portfolio itself, the deals, which a lot of just pure capital raising professionals don't have access to that or previous experience actually doing deals. So I was able to bring that to the table, which I thought was great, if I can utilize both. It also got me in front of a lot of amazing investors, from family offices to high net worths. We had a few institutions as well, but it was probably mostly family office, high net worth individuals as LPs. So that also got me into this sort of family office, exposure to this family office world, which most people find extremely opaque because it is. It's very difficult to understand, who's real, who's not real, what are they doing?
Yeah, who's got money, who doesn't have money, on what basis, and then like lots of politics and stuff with the family stuff.
Yeah.
My wife is a career lady as well, and she's on mat leave presently, but going back in January. So I guess I'm kind of like living that in terms of like observing her. She's not within real estate, but in terms of that navigation back from maternity leave back into the working world. So trying to support her as best as she goes about doing that too.
It's a tough transition, and it really does take the support at home to enable you to kind of go to work and not have to worry about anything else at home, which is tough to do, just because I wasn't physically, emotionally, or mentally ready until, I didn't take that much time off for UK standards, but kind of even like at 3-4 months, it just, I wouldn't have been able to do it. It was still very much a transition. And then when you get back to the workforce, it's really, your employer and team and how supportive they are, and understanding that you do need the flexibility now. But my God, women coming back into the workforce are some of the strongest hires you could ever make, because they will work 10 times as hard for you just to, come back and prove themselves. Like, I deserve to be here. I belong here. So hire new moms all day long.
How did you find it a struggle to move from the advisory side to the client side at M7, or kind of principal side? I appreciate you said you did that small stint elsewhere, but was that a challenge to move to the other side of the table, or was it all just wrapped up in maternity leave, got a couple of kids, back to work? The whole thing's a kind of a challenge, but I'll find a way of being able to do it.
It was a complete baptism by fire. I mean, I, again, had no idea how a kind of fund model, fund structure works once you're on the inside. So I found it all just, throwing myself back into the deep end and figuring it out. It was so fascinating. And the M7 team are just fantastic people. I've learned so much from them. And they're very much, this work hard, play hard culture, which is great. But, at one point, you are kind of burning the candle at both ends. But I just learned so much. And every experience I've had has been a massive learning experience. I have this kind of 3-year period of learning. And then once I plateau, where I'm just not growing as much, I have to switch, whether that's if the business I'm in offers the potential to move into a different role, get a different experience. I mean, every 3 years, I've either moved countries, moved companies, moved roles, because I have that sort of 3-year kind of threshold. And I just take everything as a massive learning opportunity. And if I'm not learning and if I'm not growing, I'm not interested. So I get bored very quickly.
So that's a firm boundary that you've got.
Yeah. I mean, I might end up just having to work for myself in the end, because I'm probably no longer employable. But I think every organization, if you want to keep good people, you need to provide opportunities for them to grow. Because especially the younger generation now, they really are one of the most ambitious, very switched on, but they work very differently. And so you have to provide those opportunities internally if you want to keep them around. And, this whole idea of my parents' generation, where you went into a job after college and you're there for 20, 30 years, we're not going to be seeing that anymore unless you provide the trajectory.
Yeah, and I guess in terms of the transparency, if you're not getting it there, it's very easy to see others, either that or even firms you don't know who do provide it, and the barriers of switching are much lower. So at M7, you took the relationships with capital and North American capital, you combined that with your transactional experience in the UK and across Europe, and kind of found yourself in a new role where you're kind of capital raising for various different structures, funds, vehicles at M7. What was the biggest kind of switch you had to or thing that you had to kind of get around in order to kind of convert that investment agency mindset to raising capital?
It really is, it's not pure sales in the sense that I don't really want to approach investors and them just think of me as a salesperson. I always wanted to first and foremost create the relationship. And, secondly, great. If you invest in the fund, fantastic. Because I really did. The funds performed, phenomenally well. With the foresight of the founder of the business and the management team and going into industrial very early in the sort of cycle. And it was a great, I can't sell something, we'll put it this way, if I don't fundamentally believe in it.
Yeah.
I just can't. And I would never try. So it was definitely a product I really believed in with a team that I really backed and had a huge amount of credibility, and hence why they were then sold to Oxford Properties and, went through that transition period. And it was sort of during that period that I had the opportunity to meet the founders at MARCOL, which is a business I've known the name. I didn't know the founders personally before then, but they were very active in London real estate for 40 odd years, had done a mixture of operational real estate strategies, again, that were, the asset-backed, the OpCo, PropCo structures, which I thought were so interesting. I really wanted more experience in that, but I also positioned it as, in a business development capacity. These are the things that I can potentially bring to the business. It wasn't a fund structure. It was very much direct with co-invest, whether that be family offices and institutional investors, which suits my background really well, because I can bring in those larger institutional investors as JV partners, and I can also utilize my family office network to come into deals as well. And I didn't probably appreciate at the time coming in that I'd also be creating the strategies and originating the business. And there was a lot of execution I was expected to get involved in, which again, as someone coming in a pure BD role, is not really anticipating to have to do. But that was an enormous opportunity to come in and have a lot of autonomy that I had never had previously, build a team internally. At the time, we set up a self-storage business from scratch, which, in hindsight, had we have known the challenges back then, may not have ever happened. But it was in a country in Germany, a country that we had previously been very active in, but didn't have any assets remaining in those portfolios. But we were setting up a whole new strategy in Germany for self-storage, building the whole management team on the ground as well. And I don't know how many opportunities you get like that you can come in and actually create something. Now, it wasn't executed perfectly because nothing is. And then in the midst of all of that, we've had a global pandemic, a market downturn.
Yeah.
So you combine all this. Two wars
right now.
Yeah, just adding to the complexity of everything. I would never do anything different, though, to be honest, because again, going back to that learning curve, it was so steep, but then, and in many ways, very painful having to go through some of the things that we went through, but that's where the growth is. So you don't get that growth without having to go through a bit of that pain.
For someone who hasn't heard of MARCOL before, can you just tell us, give me a bit of an overview and a background of the business and the individuals behind it and the types of kit or investments that they've made?
So I came in having met the founders. I didn't know the rest of the business particularly well, but I educated myself very quickly, and they had so many different, portfolio companies and in private equity healthcare and in real estate. So I had a lot to educate myself on, but the founders set it up in the mid to late 1970s. Terence Cole and Mark Steinberg are the principals. They're, very private, high net worth individuals. Terence was an absolute legend. We lost him last year around this time. I mean, in every sense of the word. When I joined, he was still in the office every day, lived and breathed the business. There was a bit of, there was, some hilarious moments, which looking back, you're just like, wow, some interesting conversations. But he was so on it, even in his late 80s, early 90s, had such a vision, which they executed over the 45 years of their history, which spanned from an early residential business where they were actually asset managing and converting flats for the Portman Estate, the landed estates, Eton College, other, big sort of landowners in London. Mark always likes to tell the story of buying their first flat for £10,000 in the 1970s in Marylebone. Wow. So going from a small residential business, getting into commercial, getting into big industrial portfolios, long before GFC, they tied up with HBOS in a big sort of billion euro pound strategy to buy multi-let industrial all over Europe, built that whole portfolio, sold it to Blackstone, owned hospitals, clinics in Germany with Advent International, sold that to one of the largest healthcare REITs. So, I mean, they were doing these massive deals over the
private
years.
Equity type deals. Hence why you'd met them when you were at M7, because they're the kind of shop that you would get capital from or would invest in some of the vehicles potentially that you were setting up or structuring.
Well, to be honest, they weren't going into funds, particularly real estate funds, because that's their knowledge and expertise. So they were really focused on strategies that they could apply their real estate background and many years directly, many years of doing this themselves. And then moving into pure private equity in the healthcare side, once, off the back of a few deals that they were doing, set up a team internally just to focus on that. So they've really, pivoted, transitioned the business into different growth areas over the years. So you have to give them a huge amount of credit for being able to, reinvent yourself so many times. The focus has then been less on the real estate side.
Yeah.
So we focused on operating businesses where we own and operate. And then, of course, we still have the underlying value of the assets to fall back on if, the operator isn't working or what may end up happening. But they had so much experience as well in doing that, owning caravan parks, petrol stations, the healthcare assets, hotels in the past, just kind of across all
really
sectors.
Entrepreneurial.
Very entrepreneurial.
And so for you thought you'd go and do some capital raising for them, getting equity in for the vehicles that they were going to be setting up. But you kind of found yourself going back to the early part of your career in terms of actually originating deals, but also putting a strategy and kind of being the point person for everything in terms of raising the capital for the strategy, finding the deals, putting the deals together, doing the reporting and everything else and everything in between.
Yeah, basically. I didn't realize, of course, going into it that was the brief, but most family offices, and all of them work very differently. There's no two family offices alike. They, again, gave me the autonomy to kind of build a business within a business, but you get thrown so much that is not in the job description and you just have to get on with it. So whilst you have a title, it's kind of meaningless because you just end up doing
everything.
Everything.
It's actually just don't have the headcount or the infrastructure or processes in place to have the different departments that maybe some bigger institutions have?
Well, actually, they're very well structured for a family, run business for that length of time. They have, full team in Luxembourg for the back office, accounting, finance, sort of corporate structuring functions. They have a CFO, CTO, big operations team. So it is actually, there's quite a lot of infrastructure there that you don't see very many other in family office context, depending on how mature they are in terms of generational.
Yeah, but there's just more autonomy and entrepreneurial spirit and come up with an idea, gets the backing and buy and go and run with it. So can you just give me a bit of an overview of your self-storage portfolio in Germany as it stands today? So
we started with a 5-asset seed portfolio, a mixture of development and conversion. And partnering with Angelo Gordon in 2021 gave us the additional equity to go and acquire, we're up to 16 assets now, 1 leasehold, 15 freehold. So we've grown quite substantially, and that allowed us to scale a lot faster. And I think, still, of course, any strategy you set up in 2019, 2020, given where we are today, isn't going to look quite right on the original underwrite. But I think in terms of the scale, we did well. We didn't have the resource on the ground to execute that quickly. So there's been a backlog there. And, the planning through COVID was also a huge challenge to get through. But, slowly we're getting more stores open. We now have 6 operating stores of the 16, with others in various stages of planning and development. Yeah. So we're still, working through the business plan and, getting as far as we possibly can and make up for a bit of lost time if we can. Yeah, sure. Talk to me about independence ventures that we kind of touched on it a couple of times earlier on in this conversation. Can you talk to me about it and why you set it up and what the vision and mission of that platform is? Well, I'm still with MARCOL part-time, but I wanted to start looking at different ways of helping other operators. I was getting a lot of approaches to help advise, different operators in different sectors. And some of which, didn't really align with the MARCOL investment strategy in terms of what they want to do next. So I thought if I could, still maintain my role within MARCOL and see through the storage business, which is I'm definitely incentivized to do. I also wanted a bit more flexibility to also spend time with my kids, but have the time and headspace to be thinking about kind of the future and what I want to be doing, which again is a mixture of working with different operators in different high growth sectors and seeing what else, I could apply my skills to and see, where else I could be adding value. And so that's opened up doors to join, senior housing business as a senior advisor. It's unpaid, but, I'm helping them get their business off the ground. And, there may be scope down the line to get more involved. But yes, setting up my own consulting company, Independence Ventures, well, I needed a consulting entity. And the name actually my husband came up with years ago to, he runs a restaurant F&B business in London, and I was kind of helping on the real estate side and sourced his, first site. And so we kind of set it up as a kind of entity if I, were to be able to help out. And I just used the same name, which funnily enough, because of my fierce independence myself, kind of fit. And so I just stayed with the name. But that's, enabled me to just do a few other things in, my own free time that, again, really helped me get a broader range of access and exposure to other operators. There's going to be a lot. I think that the future is extremely bright from the sense of these new operators spinning out of existing businesses or setting up their own, more entrepreneurial in their thinking and wanting to just do things differently in a different way. And I've seen that in senior housing, student living, a lot in self-storage, just because of the massive growth in the sectors. That's, not always going to be driven by the big guys, the REITs and the big institutions. They have a great, of course, role to play. But where do these businesses start off? Where do they get their seed capital? In Europe, it's really difficult to find for a new operator spinning off, not coming from wealth, not having that network and the contacts to enable them to just have the capital to start these businesses. I mean, it just doesn't exist. In the US, because it's far more mature, a lot of these operators are getting venture capital. And a venture fund is not going to touch a new real estate operator. I haven't seen much venture capital coming into the real estate space. They just don't understand it. They don't understand that it's an operating business at the end of the day that, yes, can own and operate its own real estate, but you have the real estate value, which again underpins the value of the platform. You can always change your operator if it's not working out. But I love the control, and there is definitely a value arbitrage between OpCo, PropCo, and having exposure to both. It also gives you a niche because many investors, purely real estate investors, also do not get OpCo or cannot invest in the OpCo because of their fund structure. So there's a great advantage I always thought that MARCOL had, as well as other family offices in particular, in understanding and owning operating businesses and the real estate. That really does give you an advantage in the current market. So you have a lot of PropCo investment that can come in once you have the platform established. Not many, other than pure real estate private equity funds, that can take the OpCo exposure. But once it's at a certain scale, they'd never come into a fairly early stage business. Even arguably, the platform we set up in Germany was too early stage to really attract institutional interest. But because it was self-storage, it's on the rise, it's alternatives, which is where everyone's moving towards, and away from the main food groups that aren't looking as attractive these days. So it really just fit in terms of the sector, the country. That's where the focus was. And we had more institutional interest than I thought we would have at that point.
Amazing. Well, you're absolutely right. There's so many of these kind of mid-sized businesses are being swallowed up by the Blackstones and the other larger insurance, institution, private equity investors, sovereign wealth funds. And then there's a lot of very well capitalized, very well led and really strong leadership driven, impactful, sustainability orientated firms that one might not have heard about, that have set up with some great backing behind them, an interesting strategy within a niche, And we've had quite a few of those people on the podcast already. And it's one of the reasons why I wanted to set this up, is to kind of give them a platform to share a little bit and educate the market or raise awareness of what they're doing. Because as you touched on, Blackstone started somewhere.
Right, exactly.
And, we're at a stage in terms of the cycle where, it's a great time to go or a great time to invest. And I'm really excited to see the impact that these businesses will have on the built environment and on the people that work there as well.
Yep, precisely. And it is applying, venture capital style investing to real estate operators. And I am a venture partner of an early stage fund called First Look, which is pre-seed, seed into new technologies built by diverse teams. So given just the lack of money actually flowing to female founded businesses and minority owners, it's another way of kind of helping to provide capital, not yet on the larger stage, which it definitely should be, but even just moving the needle a tiny bit in that direction. And that's new technology in finance, healthcare, future of work, and real estate. So having a bit of venture exposure there. So understanding the mindset of venture early stage, which is basically you're backing people, you're backing teams to execute a business plan. It's the same principles. You're still backing the team. You're still looking at their individual track records. And then you are applying the kind of fundamentals of real estate, the tangible assets that you can put a value on. And you're combining the two. And also the technology point, so interesting, because all of these will be tech-driven, tech-enabled platforms from the start. So the prop tech world and the institutional real estate world are not yet
fully merged.
And you'd hope with these sort of the next gen operators, they will be, because these people are super switched on with the tech already, and they'll just be building their businesses the way in which, you'd hope that they would be built today with the technology available.
And I guess from a VC or an investment or private equity kind of hat that you'd wear, the girls and guys who sit in those businesses, they're data people, right? They're numbers people.
Completely.
And actually, if you can build it with numbers and data, you can't argue. Well, it's very difficult to argue. Yes, you can interpret it in different ways, but if you can present the data in an interesting way, it's much more compelling rather than a thesis or a story that is not backed up by or integrated with data.
Absolutely. It's data, but it's also vision, because you're not necessarily, when you're doing something no one's done before, you don't have the data to back it up. When you're going, for example, I use the senior housing platform again, which is BTR for 55 and older. The rental market around, the older demographic and retirement living is so nascent. It's still very much a for sale retirement in the UK. I think it will, obviously, the future will move towards the rental end of the spectrum, which is more of the US model and what you see globally. But because of the severe lack of housing catering to this 55 and older demographic, there's so much room in the market to have a mixture of rental for sale, but it's just getting people sort of, again, it's a mindset thing, getting over the initial hurdle of, one, you can't benchmark it because not a lot of it exists. You don't have just the comparable evidence and the investment transactions to, back up your underwrite. So that is the biggest challenge in getting investors on board, and family offices will take more of a view, I think, in some of these earlier stage risks, but you're just not going to have all the data that you would want at your fingertips if you're a real disruptor and you're going into a market and properly disrupting it. And that's what we're going to see. So, but they're high conviction sectors anyway. Yeah. So there's still a huge amount of interest, but the expectation of having the data day one is
not the case.
No.
Outside of work as well, you're also involved with Mentoring Circle. For those who haven't heard of Mentoring Circle, can you just tell me a little bit about it and what it is exactly that you do there?
So Mentoring Circle was set up by
Vanessa Murray.
Yeah, Vanessa Murray and Stanhope. And I know Vanessa through Claire Dahl, one of my wonderful friends. And actually, Claire introduced me to Carrie, who's now working with Vanessa. Carrie Moyers has her own consulting company called Clarity Consulting, coaching company, I should say. She's been a career coach for many years. And Claire introduced me to Carrie. And then, put the two together. It's just a phenomenal platform. It's going such a long way to supporting, of course, more women, but also men in furthering their career and, again, getting over the various obstacles that we have and different circumstances, depending on the type of business you're in. They have a phenomenal list of very high quality, top business leaders, women, doing the mentoring. Absolutely phenomenal platform. So they're going to be doing a lot more with that platform over the years. And Carrie, anytime someone asks me for a coaching contact, I always send them to Carrie. She's brilliant. She also worked in the real estate industry, so she understands and knows some of the personalities that we're having to deal with.
Yeah, and the different hurdles and stages and how to get through it. So I guess if you're at what stage in your career can you get involved with Mentoring Circle? And
any stage.
Any stage.
Yeah.
So if you want to be a mentor or a mentee?
Either as a mentor or mentee. There's an annual intake, which I can't remember the exact timing of, but we're just coming up on a renew of the next cycle. So you can, and what I also love is reverse mentoring. Mm-hmm. I love to speak to younger generations and tell them, some of the issues I'm having and see what they say. It's a very different approach, but it's great. I think, all platforms should have a bit of reverse mentoring as well.
So look, as we draw to a kind of a close in terms of this conversation, a question that I ask everyone that comes on the podcast is, if you had £500 million worth of equity, who are the people, what property, and which place would you look to deploy that capital?
This is a very good question. Well, I would absolutely stick with providing the necessary seed capital to new operators in high growth sectors. I'd start in the UK because I can name 4 or 5 different examples off the top of my head where startup real estate operators in new sectors desperately need the startup capital and aren't connected to the right people and don't have friends and family money, just really, your average but amazing operator who's just doesn't have the right networks to get them off the ground, don't have the personal wealth or the personal capital, but doesn't mean that they're not, so qualified and have the right experience to be able to execute it. So I'd love to be able to, put a team together to help support and back them, not just capital, but also all the supporting services that early stage operators need, whether it's development support, asset management support, underwriting support, coaching. A huge amount of that should go into setting up these platforms. So the capital is definitely one thing that is absolutely necessary, but then, you want these businesses to succeed. If you have a stake in them, you absolutely want them to succeed. They're bringing the pipeline of real estate that you're also funding the first 2 or 3 deals to create the platform that becomes investable from an institutional perspective. But there's a lot that goes into it. And having been able to build, a team within a business to enable us to do the self-storage platform, I'd love to just take those same principles and apply them to other sectors.
And which sectors would they be?
So again, that's definitely senior, but starting from 55 and older, not necessarily acute care, but providing housing for an older demographic to reduce the amount of care that they should need over time, which also reduces the massive burden on our healthcare system. That takes a bit of vision to see that through. Student housing in the UK is probably getting a little bit saturated, but there's huge scope across Europe to really get into student in a big way. There's a lot more to do there. Self-storage, definitely. Again, UK's a bit, I would never say oversupplied because there's still further growth, but elsewhere in Europe, self-storage is absolutely going to, be the next big sector. Micro data centers, I like. Life sciences, I love if you can find the right operator to kind of help the institutions in particular deploy as much capital into that sector.
So niches within niches.
Yes. Also leisure. There's some really interesting leisure concepts popping up. What do we do with all this big retail block space that needs to be utilized? There's so much to do with, secondhand space and being creative about it and bringing in operators to help you sort these issues out. So so many opportunities.
UK,
honestly.
Europe, some micro
UK,
niches,
Europe.
but all operationally driven.
Yes.
In terms
and
of
tech.
and tech, operationally driven and tech enabled, with a vision, or backing founders with a vision and an ability to storytell is kind of what you're after.
Absolutely. 100%.
Well, Rebekah, you've had a fascinating career. You've been able to reinvent yourself, change geographies, change platforms, return to work and juggle everything at home, as well as power your career ahead. So you've had a fascinating...
Wow, thank you. I don't do it as a perfectionist, that's for sure. You, in fact,
no one, all smoke and mirrors, but everyone's doing the same thing.
Surface level,
right?
it looks like I'm keeping things together, but it's a complete, I'm the duck or the swan, or whatever they say, with the feet underneath the water.
You clearly thrive in chaos, and probably part of your personality needs that in order to get the best out of you. So
you're exactly right. You hit the nail on the head. Thriving in chaos.
Thriving in chaos. Well, look, I'm really excited to see what next year and the years ahead have got in store. So thanks so much for joining the podcast.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me, Matt.
Sharing with me a little bit more about your story and background.
Appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the People, Property, Place podcast. If you found it insightful, feel free to share it with a friend or colleague. Give us a rating, like, or comment. It helps tremendously. It'd be great to hear from you on LinkedIn. I'm super open-minded to recommendations of guests that we should have on the show, or areas of the market we should explore further. So do drop me a message. The People, Property, Place podcast is powered by Rockborn. The team recruit leadership and future leadership hires for real estate owners, funds, investors, and developers. So if you're looking to hire top talent for your business, head over to the website www.rockborn.com, where you'll be able to find a wealth of information, or feel free to drop me a message on LinkedIn. Have a great day wherever you are, and I look forward to catching you next